Good morning, everyone. To introduce today's presentation, I'm going to have Charity Franks with Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. She's going to go into Tampa Bay's Regional Planning Council, what they do here, and then we're going to get into brownfields and understanding them, have some guest speakers, some interactive activities like polls and looking at maps. And yeah, Charity, you should have access to the slides and feel free to start whenever you're ready.
All right. Thank you, Elise. Appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for joining us here this morning. Thanks for coming to our Brownfields 101 Blight to Bright workshop. I am Charity Franks, the Local Emergency Planning Committee Coordinator with the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council. It's a pleasure to welcome you all to this event. Thank you to NJIT, the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. I think the Environmental Protection Commission is here, and FDEP for joining us this morning. Thank you to all of you. Before we dive into today's discussion, I do just want to give an overview of TBRPC and explain why we're excited to host this event. Many of you are from our member governments, but for those who aren't, I just wanted to give you a basic background on us. Some of you might have worked with us in the past on events or projects, but for those who haven't, the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council is a multi-county organization that's dedicated to fostering communication, coordination, and collaboration across our region. We work with local governments, emergency managers, planners, and industry partners to tackle some of the most pressing challenges that are facing our communities. We're one of 10 regional planning councils in the state of Florida. And the main two things that we do are coordination and technical assistance. We work on things like economic development, and building environmental resilience, disaster preparedness. We serve 6 counties on the west coast of Florida, from all the way up from Citrus County down to Manatee County. And we have members from 23 city governments. That's our region. Recently, we've been exploring adding brownfields as an additional area of support for our member governments. Brownfields might be a familiar concept to some of you, but others might just be starting to explore how these sites can fit into your community's future and your redevelopment plan. Whether you're leading a well-established program and you've received grants in the past, or you're just hearing about brownfields and starting to ask questions and explore whether or not you have them in your community, we hope that this workshop will be a benefit to you. So I'll briefly cover today's agenda, what we're going to be going over in the workshop. We'll start by covering a basic introduction to brownfields to get us all on the same page. We'll have a presenter from Treasure Coast speak about their experience, go into the redevelopment process, cover funding opportunities, technical assistance resources, from NJIT, and then we'll open up some questions before we let you guys go. And we'll have some great opportunities for activities in between to help solidify some of the concepts that we cover. We hope this event can be the start of a regional brownfields coalition between all of us. And we hope that the TBRPC can serve as a key resource for counties and municipalities who are looking to navigate funding opportunities and redevelopment strategies. The goal is to build a network where we can share knowledge and leverage our partnerships and bring new life to the underutilized properties all across our region. With that said, thank you all for being here this morning, and let's go ahead and get started. Elise, I'll toss it to you.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Charity.
Thank you.
So my name is Elise Muller. I'm a Brownfield redevelopment specialist with NJIT TAB. I'm going to be going into a background on brownfields a little bit to really understand what a brownfield site is, as well as the origin of these sites throughout our country. Let's jump back in time to the 1700s, 1800s, and early 1900s during the Industrial Revolution. There were plenty of sites around the state, the country, our towns that served as agricultural land, factories, mills, and manufacturing facilities. And in the 1880s, the construction of the first railroad links in the Tampa Bay region brought the development of thriving cigar as well as phosphate industries. Operations performed at industrial sites like farmlands and plantations, textile mills, chemical manufacturing, machinery shops, tanneries, leatheries, and so on. They typically used large amounts of chemicals such as pesticides or dyes and petroleum products. Chemicals were spilled from trains during loading and unloading. Drums were knocked over, bumped into, and hazardous substances seeped into the floor drains and then the ground as well. The common practice of getting rid of the waste at the time was either dumping them out the back door, maybe into the nearby river, or even burying them on site. This practice of waste disposal and uncontrolled spills continued until the first environmental laws came about in the 1960s. And ironically, it was this, among other factors, that prompted an economic shift. So these industries, factories, warehouses, and mills, as well as the rail yards that were once a huge part of the economic fabric, either moved out of state or they became obsolete. But abandoned industrial sites, as well as the soil and water contamination, had remained. So what really is a brownfield? The US EPA defines a brownfield site as real property, the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse of which may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. It's a mouthful. A lot of state environmental departments have their own definition of brownfields, and they may differ slightly from the EPA's. So, for example, the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection identifies a brownfield site as being commercial and/or industrial. So residential buildings and sites cannot be considered a brownfield in New Jersey. As for the Florida DEP's definition, brownfields are also specifically defined as industrial and commercial facilities. But brownfield sites don't just only include those old factories from the Industrial Revolution that are easier to identify. There are also buildings like this former dry cleaner in Alabama, this abandoned gas station and former bus stop in Brooksville, or this vacant bank in Cocoa Beach. So these non-industrial brownfield sites, they can include closed gas stations, auto repair shops, former dry cleaners, and other vacant commercial properties and dump sites. Typically, these small businesses also used and handled chemicals, and the buildings can be considered brownfields based on the nature of the materials themselves, like asbestos or lead paint. But let's briefly talk about the negative impacts of brownfield sites. Take a look at these screenshots from Florida news articles that contain phrases like abandoned elementary school goes up in flames with a firefighter injured, hundreds of tires that were dumped on a vacant property, abandoned buildings tagged with graffiti, laced with profanity, and family displaced after abandoned structure collapses and falls onto the home. Brownfields can contribute to neighborhood deterioration, as well as negative perceptions of the neighborhood. They can attract vandals, open dumping, or other unwanted criminal activity. They can degrade soil, water, and air quality and potentially cause public health issues. They can lower property values, reduce employment opportunities, and can lead to lost tax revenue and limited economic growth. And combined, these impacts raise issues of social equity and environmental justice, as they're typically not felt equally by all communities. Brownfields do exist in every community, but they're not distributed equally. Here's some data from the EPA that shows that those living within half and 1 mile radius of brownfield sites are more likely to be minority, low income, linguistically isolated resident, and less likely to have a formal education. However, this data might be skewed because this comes directly from a reporting system of cities and nonprofits that do have EPA grants. So at surface level, that means that these organizations have the capacity to apply for a grant and manage a grant that's hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars. So when we look at data, especially when we're talking about these types of communities, we need to think about whose voices are missing and who's being left out. These correlations aren't new, though. They were first noticed during the civil rights era. However, the first comprehensive study of environmental racism was published in April 1983 called Solid Waste Sites in the Black Houston Community. This study concluded that Houston landfills were located disproportionately close to Black neighborhoods and was a pattern that had been occurring over decades. That same year, the government also conducted a study through the General Accounting Office called Siting of Hazardous Waste Landfills and Their Correlation with Racial and Economic Status. This study was completed because of a peaceful protest and sit-in a year prior, protesting a hazardous waste landfill in a primarily Black community. But having brownfield sites does come with some advantages. Many of them are located along waterways and rail lines, or central roadways and interstates, as well as within central downtown areas, making their locations advantageous for redevelopment. Many already have existing infrastructure like utility and sewer lines, or they may hold some historical or architectural significance. I don't know about you, but I've walked by buildings that are beautiful with stained glass windows or really cool detailed woodwork on the outside that are sitting vacant or abandoned and kind of deteriorating, and I just think it's such a shame. Most of all, though, a brownfield holds potential for being transformed into a community asset. Although these sites can plague our communities, as we've already pointed out, cleanup and redevelopment of brownfields presents us with unique opportunities. These are some before and after photos showing an example of a brownfield being transformed to meet a community's need, as well as serve as an asset. So here we see brownfield sites that are redeveloped into affordable housing and residential complexes. So, looking through the lens of what's known as a triple bottom line, improving the environment, benefiting the economy, and bolstering equity, cleaning up and redeveloping brownfield sites touches upon all three. Simply put, we're improving the environment because we remove pollution when we clean up brownfield sites. Brownfields can be redeveloped to deal with climate change issues such as persistent flooding by creating land uses that store floodwaters like rain gardens, seen on the right side of the screen, multi-use fields, and other forms of green stormwater infrastructure. They can also be developed for green roofs, like seen on the left side of the screen. Redeveloping brownfield sites can also improve a community's economic conditions by catalyzing economic development, creating jobs, increasing tax revenue, and diversifying the local economic base. And finally, redeveloping brownfield sites helps to improve social equity in many different ways. This can include by improving health and safety hazards, removing eyesores and improving community appearances, alleviating community fears and worries about their areas, and also transforming the properties into community-needed uses like affordable housing, recreation, schools, healthcare facilities, urgent cares, and so much more. The redeveloped brownfields are the key ingredients to creating economically, environmentally, and socially equitable communities, but the process of cleaning up and redeveloping contaminated properties can be a daunting task, especially for local governments and nonprofits. At a minimum, this process involves determining the presence of contaminants in the soil, water, air, and building materials, understanding the state's regulatory process, identifying and navigating the myriad of funding and financing options, engaging the community, hiring and managing consultants and contractors, and then finally overseeing the redevelopment activities or maybe marketing the properties to real estate developers. So with all those steps in mind, I'd like to introduce Stephanie Height with Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council, who's going to tell us more about the organization's experiences and successes with brownfields.
Hi, I am Stephanie Height. I'm the Deputy Executive Director of the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. I'm going to talk a little bit about our program. The image we have here is one of the things that not a lot of people know about the Brownfields program. You can also do redevelopment planning. So this is an old landfill site in a historic African-American community where we did some planning with the public to create more of a community amenity. Hopefully I don't repeat a lot of what Elise said because she had a lot of great things. I don't think I have control.
I think you should have control, but I can go ahead and move it for you, Stephanie. I think that was you.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, so our program started back in 2003 when we got a petroleum assessment grant. And you can see as we were using those, we continued to build on the success of the projects we had. We created and established a revolving loan fund in 2005. And then many more grants. We did a lot of coalition assessment grants with the South Florida Regional Planning Council, with Miami Waterkeepers. We worked with also, one of our counties became a coalition assessment partner. So our latest grant is $500,000 for community-wide grant assessment. We are almost through that. We just got that in 2022. So we've been able to build on the success of the projects that we've had and create more funding and really build up our revolving loan fund through that funding. So maybe me? Hold on. There we go. Okay, so a lot of what Elise said is what I wanted to share also. Our local governments that we serve really like the Brownfield program because it helps to transform liabilities into assets for them. It cleans up properties and makes them unencumbered. We have a greater market value and then the greater tax potential for them. So it's reducing sprawl, using existing infrastructure and just reducing the exposure to hazards, creating jobs and services that we need. And also one of the things is it eliminates eyesores. So it gives that community a sense of pride where they live. So when we set up our program, our goals were, let's not just do a bunch of environmental site assessments and move on. We wanted to do big transformative projects. If you could build momentum by having one catalyst site, and then next thing you know, the redevelopment's happening around that. We leverage resources for projects that we use. and that we do here. We have a design studio. So we were actually able to get a grant to help a brownfields grant for a rail corridor, like doing properties along a rail corridor from one of the projects where we were helping to do some redesign for that. But I think the most important thing is you've got to engage the public. That they're the most important people. We all know, working with the public, we need to make sure that we're serving their needs, their wants, and making sure we're providing the public with what they need. So, one of our biggest success stories is the former H.D. King Power Plant. This is in the city of Fort Pierce in St. Lucie County. From 1912 to 2008, it was a power generation facility. They demolished it or finished the demolition in 2009. It's 6 acres. You can kind of see on the one picture there outlining it, there's a marina nearby, so it's close to the water, prime downtown real estate. And then to the north there, it's adjacent to a historic environmental justice community. So, in building on projects that we have been working 2008. The downtown was in redevelopment mode. They wanted to kind of spark economic development down there, do some things, entertainment, all of that. So we held a charrette in 2008. And so here's the site. And then if you look at the community's plan for it, they wanted to make sure that this site was not only, it powered the community for years in the sense of providing power to the community. But now what they wanted was a new destination, like an entertainment district, a place for residents to go, for tourists to go. And then it would also promote economic development and provide jobs for the citizens. One of the things we did that was unique about this project, it was split into 3 parcels. So we obtained 3 brownfield site rehabilitation agreements, or BIDRAs. What this allowed us to do is do some incremental closing of the properties, which allowed us to then get additional funding and then additional tax credits and benefits through the state's program. And then it also allows for implementation of those competing visions maybe that the citizens had for that project. So all in all, the city earned $2 million in tax credits from this site. So, and currently there is a developer that's going to develop the larger piece of the site. Hotels, some apartments, some retail, just bring some more to the downtown. And he's in negotiations to actually for an investor to develop one of the smaller pieces of property to help with, promote the investment of that asset. And so we did environmental assessments. We removed, helped with the removal of the impacted soil. So you can see it right there in the top picture there. It's that kind of beige. Right there, you can see it is in a marvelous place. I did a breakdown there just to show that we did use different kinds of grants. In 2013 is when we started our revolving loan fund for them. We started building that. They each year they were able to get supplementals to continue working on the different parcels of the property. And then so it was about 1.7 that they actually got in revolving loan funds, and by getting those tax credits back, they've actually already paid off. I'm sorry, the chat's popping over me. They've actually already paid back their loan to us, so we do now have that money available to recycle to another project. And so if you see, the downtown Fort Pierce and the county, they love brownfields. So in 2019, because the commissioners recognized the importance of the brownfields designation, they had the port designated as a brownfields. And then most recently, they brought in Director. Director has a few facilities and facilities up north as well. What they do is they do mega yacht refitting and retrofitting, repairs, things like that. They actually have the tallest boat lift in North America. There we are on a field trip with my economic development people to see that. And you can see that the boats are actually very big. I think we should have stood a little closer to them, but it's kind of scary. So, okay, another site that we had is the Anchorage Park. This was an abandoned wastewater treatment and sewage facility. It started in 1956, and then in 1994, it was vacated by the utility, deeded over to the village of North Palm Beach. Upon taking ownership, the village of North Palm Beach demolished the wastewater treatment plant structure and then hired a consultant to come in to do a plan for the park. And if it's going to move, in this picture, you can see there, that's the whole park area. And then there's where the wastewater treatment plant was on 5.7 acres. We did groundwater sampling, soil sampling. We provided a $100,000 cleanup grant to them through our revolving loan fund. We completed an analysis for brownfields cleanup alternatives. And there were over 20 tons of sediment removed. And let's see, it will show you. So some of the challenges that they had, of course, it was a wastewater treatment plant. So there's lots of challenges with that. There were 3 inactive petroleum tanks that actually still had some petroleum in there. There was dredge and disposal waste because they had like the sewage spread out in drying beds that all had to be removed. And then with the demolition, they needed to do an asbestos abatement as well for the buildings, the pipings, the ceilings, and all of that as they were doing their remediation. So the result is taking a former wastewater treatment plant and transforming it into a open space, green space park. So this section that we did became part of a 21-acre park with a lot of different amenities. A lot of boat, because it is near the water, boat things, storage, fishing, picnic areas, playgrounds. So this is a great example, I think, of taking a contaminated community eyesore and changing it into a community asset. And I believe that is it for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Stephanie. We actually had a question in chat. For the grants that you were mentioning, could you clarify, were they federal, were they state, a mix of them, county?
Everything was through EPA. So all of those grants that we did was through EPA. Other than the era, I believe, that I took over in 2014. So some of that stuff, I can't take credit for everything that happened with it, but yes, this is our EPA Brownfields program.
Awesome. And Stephanie's contact information is up there if you'd like to learn more. But I also mentioned in chat that we will be discussing funding a little bit later in today's presentation, so stay tuned. Thank you so much, Stephanie. So we established what a brownfield is, and then Stephanie with Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council kind of gave us a glimpse into just one organization's experiences and successes with brownfield projects and how far that can go. So let's say, yes, we have a brownfield site, but now what do we do? There's really no set recipe, but there is a generalized process. And here's the different stages of brownfield redevelopment, but it's not always linear. It's possible to have some hiccups along the way of the redevelopment project that may put it on hold for a day, month, or year. But the most foundational stage here is planning. Then your qualified environmental professional is going to walk you through the site assessment or investigation, and then site remediation or cleanup of the site. Finally, we have site redevelopment. There are things that need to happen at the beginning and throughout to nurture your redevelopment project, and these include meaningful community engagement, not just checking off a box, identifying and planning for your funding sources, taking care of and building your partnerships, and revisiting your site reuse vision as the project evolves. It may change. I'd now like to introduce my colleague, Kaylin Bruno, Director of Environmental Services at NJIT TAB, to further discuss identifying brownfields in the Tampa Bay area, as well as the brownfield redevelopment process.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Again, my name is Kaylin Bruno. I'm with NJIT, and I'm going to discuss these elements that Elise just introduced, these elements of the brownfield redevelopment process in greater detail. And first is the planning aspect. I think, as you saw in Stephanie's presentation, this is really a critically important step in your brownfield redevelopment process. She just gave really good examples of how sound planning is essential to the success of her program. And you'll see if you're just starting off in your brownfield redevelopment journey, it can be very easy to just focus on that one problematic site because every brownfield does bring its own challenges, and it's very easy just to get hung up on the site-centric problem, but a better approach will be to plan your program carefully. So I'm going to walk through some maps, illustrate why, and we'll go through together just a planning exercise. So first, what you're seeing here is a map showing your Tampa Bay regional area with the brownfield areas and sites from DEP's website. Take note of where they are, what they look like. We'll talk a little more detail about what these areas actually are later in our presentation. But just for now, note what the distribution looks like. And so let's consider these counties up here: Citrus, Hernando, and Pasco. There's no or just a few brownfield areas. And at the beginning of the presentation, we asked you a question, a true or false. If there are no brownfield areas or sites mapped by the DEP, then that means there's no brownfields. And most of you got this correct. That is false. So you can definitely still have brownfield sites, even if they're not mapped by the DEP. So this map shows another layer on top of the brownfield areas, and these gray dots represent DEP cleanup sites. Not all of these are going to meet the definition of brownfields, but this shows us that there are sites with confirmed contamination across the region. And I picked just a random cluster to zoom into Brooksville, not to pick on you. I don't know if we have anyone from Brooksville in the house this morning. But let's take a closer look at this cluster of gray dots. So one of the gray dots I just randomly picked turns out is the location of this Mountaineer coffee shop. When we look at historic maps, we see that this coffee shop was once a gas station. So does this meet the definition of a brownfield? I would say no, because it's currently actively being used as a business, at least according to Google Maps and Google Street View. But this may at one point have been vacant, and then at that point it would have been considered a brownfield. So let's take another cruise around Brooksville. What about this site? This was one of the gray dots, again, on the map showing cleanup sites. So is this one a brownfield? And can you guess what the previous use was? You're from Florida, you probably recognize this as common architecture of old gas stations. We don't see gas stations like this up in New Jersey. I love how cute these buildings are. In this case, yes, it would be a brownfield because of its former use as a gas station. Also, just because I know, and I'm in this industry, my eagle eye, I see some monitoring wells here, which could indicate that there's been at least an investigation of groundwater at this site. And in this picture, it looks like the business is vacant. It's not being used, so that would be a brownfield. Now, in present day, or at least a more recent picture, it looks like somebody else also appreciated the very cute architecture of this building, and now it's being reused as a general store. So how cool is that, right? Another success, a brownfield success story. Now, here's one. This just, is very obviously a brownfield site. It's definitely not currently being used. It's definitely has that cute building architecture that I love of a former gas station. And you'll note here too, these square looking manholes. And if you look closer, it says SVE next to those manholes. I don't know for sure. I didn't review the reports for this particular site. Typically, that means soil vapor extraction system. So this site is actively being cleaned up here. So that even if it's being actively cleaned up, it's still a brownfield. And if we take a look at the site directly next door to that gas station, we see another former gas station. I say former because I don't see any pumps. And it does look like it also has an attached garage where they did some auto repair. Likely this site is not represented as a gray dot on that map. So this is not actively being cleaned up. If we look at it on Google Maps, it does look like it's being actively used. It's in good shape. It looks like a business is operating there. But according to Google Maps, it might be closed. So if we were to make a determination about this site, if it's a brownfield or not, we need more information. So that process that we just went through, looking at potentially contaminated sites, confirmed contaminated sites, and seeing if they meet the definition of a brownfield is the process that you would go through of putting together what we call a brownfield inventory. This is your most fundamental step in brownfields planning, getting your arms around the scope of the issue in your community. So whether that's on a neighborhood level, municipal, county level, this is the fundamental step. Overall, in planning our brownfields program, our goal is to develop a strategic approach and cohesive vision for brownfield redevelopment. This is really important because it will help you access more funding, as we saw in potentially in Stephanie's program. They overcome project hurdles and ensure continuity. So how do we do this? How do we create this cohesive vision and strategic approach? First, you do your brownfield inventory. And as you're doing that, you're placing dots on the map, and you might notice a cluster start to emerge that could serve as your target area. So you might have a cluster of brownfields that you will want to address first. In your target area, then your next step is to identify priority sites. These don't have to be the biggest, ugliest sites, although they can be, but they can also be priorities because of where they're located. Maybe one's on Main Street, or if it's in a flood zone. Maybe you have an eager developer that can kick off and catalyze more exciting projects. So in determining what your priority sites are, you should include the public. And this is another point that Stephanie highlighted in her program. You're engaging the public. You want to identify your stakeholders, develop a site reuse vision, and get a handle of what the community needs and wants are. You also want to know what else is going on in the context of the neighborhood. You have initiatives to increase pedestrian access. Do you have new school construction, that sort of thing? This is a process where each piece informs the rest. And it's kind of an iterative and integrated process where you're further refining what your brownfield program is going to look like. Then you can organize your thoughts and steps into a brownfield blueprint. And this can act as just your overall guidance document for your program. All right, we have our inventory. We chose a priority site in our target area. How do we investigate it? So we're going to walk you through this. This is a gas station. It's on Main Street in a downtown business district. It's a very visible area. We picked this as a priority site because of its location. It's been out of business for a very long time. It's totally paved. It's painted black. In the summer, this just radiates heat when you walk past it. It contributes to flooding in the area. So we really want to address this. How do we do that? First, we do an assessment. The first step of which is called the Phase 1 Environmental Site Assessment. So this is my number one piece of advice. If you remember nothing else from this presentation today, this is the importance of a Phase 1 Environmental Site Assessment. This is going to give you liability protection and be very important as you're addressing these sites. This assessment is where we have a qualified environmental professional. They take a deep dive into the history of that site, see where the pollution might occur at the site. And we have a bunch of resources that we consult in order to do this assessment. One of them is historic maps. So we're reviewing historic maps for the site. We're looking at reports. We're asking the DEP if they have any previous database for reports on this site. We're going to go to the municipality, look at construction records, and we're going to go through all this and compile a list of areas that we think might be contaminated from previous use of chemicals, like in this case, gasoline. We're also going to do a detailed site visit. So here we have identified, we have 3 gas tanks that may or may not still be there. We have the gas dispensers, the piping in between them. We saw floor drains inside the building where chemicals may have been dumped in the past. And we see a pile of stained soil on the site. So all of those, anything that we think might cause contamination to the site will be included and listed in the phase 1 environmental report. And your qualified environmental professional will make a professional determination on whether or not they need to be further investigated. And that next step is phase 2 environmental site assessment. This is where we go out and actually drill holes and collect soil and groundwater samples to make a determination if contamination is present or not. So these pink boxes represent our samples that we took. And then say we do confirm that there is contamination on this site. Then we need to go out and we need to collect more samples. This can kind of be a difficult process because really the point of the next step is to determine how far the contamination goes, how deep it goes. You should really be able to illustrate all the environmental issues on the site through the sampling program. And this is harder than it sounds. I mean, this all happens underground. You can't directly see it. And it's in 3 dimensions. So this can be challenging. This can be expensive. And it can take a couple of rounds. But once we have a clear idea of where everything is, then we can make a plan for cleanup. Clean it up. And most people don't know this, but we usually do leave some contamination in the ground. It's rarely feasible to get every molecule out of there, but at this point, you should be doing it in compliance with a remedial action that's the DEP is agreed with. So we're going to go over that a little more later on in the presentation. And the overall goal is to keep human health and the environment safe. And then we can redevelop it. So now Holly Walnuts has a nice place to bask in the sun. So again, that's the overview of the general process. What I didn't mention when I showed the slide before was your task force. So this is comprised of your Brownfield champion, your project partners, and your stakeholders. They're the team that's really driving this process forward, and they'll have different perspectives on your projects that will be really helpful. So now we're going to take what you've learned about this process and these planning considerations to an activity we call Martian Makeover. So I'll hand this back over to Elise.
All right. So I believe that some of you have received the Martian Makeover map yesterday and today. No worries, you don't have to pull it out. We actually are going to share the screen with it on it. Let me pull that up right now. And thank you so much, Kaylin, for walking us through that process. I think, like I mentioned before, it can be really daunting for people that are going through the brownfield redevelopment process. But seeing it explained in ways, especially, at least for me, I'm definitely a visual learner. And for animations and stuff like that, it makes it a lot more easier. So thank you so much. Let me pull that up. All right. I think everyone should be looking at the Martian Makeover. And again, I know we have a lot of questions in chat, which is awesome. We will be addressing those at the end. Just if you can use the Q&A box instead of the chat box, that way we can keep track of all the questions. With chat, sometimes there's other comments, there's links being sent and things, and we might not be able to keep track of your question. Now you should be able to see your Martian Makeover map, and you can actually zoom in on it. You can look around. Let's see. I'm zooming in. I don't think that it's showing my screen for you. So feel free to take a look at whatever you'd like. We have a little GIF of a Martian moving over in that top left corner. But we're going to start by looking at these sites through the eyes of the Roswell Economic Development Agency. So, hello, welcome to Roswell. Your mission as the Roswell Economic Development Agency is to improve economic and social conditions in Roswell by stimulating investment, enhancing the business environment, and creating jobs for area residents. Which site do you want to choose for your brownfield redevelopment project? So if you missed those instructions or want to reread them, they are on the right side of your screen. But right now, I kind of want us to use the chat function. Look through all the sites right now. There's a bunch of different sites, and they have information like what their current use is, their former use, site status, acreage, who currently owns it. And then we also have aspects of the map that shows maybe it's in a downtown revitalization area or downtown area. Maybe it's an industrial zone or next to and nearby a flood zone. Maybe it's in an environmental justice neighborhood. So with the mission and task of the Roswell Economic Development Agency in mind, as you are now an employee of that organization, what site are you looking at for a brownfield redevelopment project? And also, what do you want to develop it as? There's really no wrong answers here. Not at all. I know people say that a lot, but there's no wrong answers. So feel free to kind of take a moment, look around, and see what you'd like to work on. So I'm thinking, enhancing business environment, creating jobs, is there anything that's drawing anyone to certain sites? Maybe away from certain sites? And as Fatima put in the chat, you can zoom in and out on the bottom right. And you can also use the bars on the bottom side of the screen and the right side of the screen. I'm going to give a couple moments to kind of look over sites, and I'll stop talking. All right, so we have someone in chat saying Site 6 looks good. It's a small linear pocket park with canopy for shade overhead. I like that. I'm envisioning it. I like it a lot. Number 3, it's large and currently vacant. Okay, I like that as well. What would you make it as? What are you envisioning, especially as the Roswell Economic Development Agency? Think stimulating investment, creating jobs, bringing more businesses to the area. I think the comment for a small linear pocket is perfect for our second organization, which is Urbanites for Open Space. High density housing and mixed use, commercial first floor since it's part of downtown. I like that a lot. That's awesome. That's a really good point. And that mixed use portion of it is going to bring in some businesses. It's going to, attract the people in the area as well as those who are living right above it. Site 5, former old Department of Public Works building as a community park or resource building for health and workforce training. That's awesome. I'm pulling up Site 5 right now. It's a vacant building and lot owned by the city. That makes it a little bit easier as well. These are some really awesome thought processes. Really, the world is your limit with what you want to build right now. We don't have to worry about money. We don't have to worry about regulations. Anyone else have any sites jumping out to them? Along the rivers, take advantage of natural resources as attractive locations. That's a great point. What kind of businesses do you think you could put along the rivers and that would like to take advantage of that beauty? Oh, yeah, absolutely. People want to see that. All right, let's move on to the second organization. This is the Urbanites for Open Space, or the UFOs. Your mission is to investigate available properties in Roswell to obtain for open space preservation or for conservation, recreation, or permanent preservation. Lots of shins there. So what site are you looking at for your job as a representative of the UFOs? Site 7, ask the community what they want and need. That's a great point as well. Community engagement is not just something that we want to do to check off a box. We want to hear what the community needs in their area, what they want to see in their area. Because when you engage the community, or maybe lack thereof, when you don't engage the community, it can really put a stop to projects. Canoe, kayak, paddling rental. I love that. That sounds fun. I'm signing up for that one. Native plants, whenever possible, to be in harmony. That sounds beautiful. I love that as well. Site 9 could be a great option for UFOs and is already city owned. Could be great for conservation, education, and a community resource overall. Let me look at Site 9 and pull that up. Yeah, it's a good site. 3 acres, confirmed asbestos, which isn't the worst of the worst environmental contamination ever. It's something that needs to be worked on, absolutely. Trail along old railroad tracks, Site 4. That's also a great thing. Rail to trails, former railroad tracks being turned into walkable paths that draws a lot of the community. And, sometimes that's exactly what the community wants to see. Sites close to downtown, redevelop urban core. I like that a lot. Now, for UFOs or for Roswell Economic Development Agency, are there any sites that you really don't want to work on? It's kind of turning you away. Maybe it's the environmental contamination. Maybe it's the lack of information that you have, or the owner is not really willing to work with you on it. Site 7, to prevent development for floodplain Sioux. Ask about local flooding in the flood zone. Yeah, so now we're paying more attention to the flood zone. As beautiful as it is to kind of bring businesses right next to the river, we also do have to think of that. Sites 7 and 9 could potentially exacerbate or mitigate local flooding depending on what they're redeveloped as. That's a great point. And very true, especially something that we kind of talked about earlier is there's ways that we can, clean up the environment and also work with it. 9 and 7 can be used for conservation wetland. Yeah, that's great. Let me see. Oh, yeah, absolutely. $150 acres of Site 10 lends itself to mixed-use retail, commercial, low-income housing. Yeah, with that many acres, with that big of a site, there's a lot of opportunity there. It's going to be a lot of work, but again, we're not worried about that work right now. We are existing as the UFOs or the Roswell Economic Development Agency. Green space elevates property values. Absolutely. So I think with this exercise, what we're doing is we're taking what we discussed earlier, what Stephanie gave us a glimpse into, what Kaylin discussed and described in better detail, just kind of understanding all these steps that go into it and what you want to take into consideration, whether that's the different zones that your site's near, the environmental aspect of it as well, the site status, and we're going to go further into it as well. So thank you, everyone, for that. Let's see if I can stop sharing. I think that was great. Everyone did a great job, and I hope that your gears are turning as mine are. Reading your comments, every time I look at that map, I think of something different. I see, I notice something new about a site, and I see a different vision or maybe another roadblock or something like that. So I'm going to pull up the slides again. There's our little Martian. He's happy that we're doing some work on his land. So thank you. And so just some questions for your consideration. We're not you don't need to put them in chat if you don't want to, but just something to think about after doing that activity. If there was a news article about your community's current brownfield status, what would the headline be? What would it look like? And then imagine that those brownfields in the future are redeveloped. What's the headline now? Also think about who the critical players are in that story's success. This is something that, we can take away from Stephanie's presentation as well. And finally, who is currently being impacted by the brownfield sites and what role do they play in their reuse? Again, these slides will be sent out, so I hope that you can kind of play around with the map a little bit, show it to some of the colleagues or friends, and ask yourself these questions as well. Now, as we discussed a little bit earlier, funding. You might be thinking that's a lot of steps, and those steps aren't free or free 99, as I like to say. So the general steps of planning for, assessing, cleaning up, and redeveloping your brownfield sites, it does come with a cost. Most counties and municipalities don't have the funds to cover all those costs, so it's important to promote private sector interest for successful projects. It's critical to know where to find funding, how to secure it, and how to apply it to your project. Brownfield projects are funded by multiple sources, and that may include grants, loans, and tax incentives, to name a few. The key to successfully funding a brownfield project is the ability to bundle those multiple sources, which is commonly referred to as a funding stack, like the stack of pancakes here. So bundling, funding stack. The various funding resources that you have identified most likely will apply to only a certain phase or task along the way, only apply to a certain element of your project, and are only available at certain times of the year. So it all goes back to planning. Having a solid redevelopment plan is critical to applying funding resources. And speaking of funding, the EPA has grant money that's allocated for brownfield redevelopment projects. These are the EPA Brownfield MARC grants, which are the multipurpose grant, a range of planning, assessment, and cleanup activities at one or more brownfield sites in your target areas are covered by this. Assessment grants can cover activities like making brownfield inventories, planning environmental assessments, and community outreach. Revolving loan fund grants, or RLF grants, capitalize loans that are used to clean up brownfields. And cleanup grants, self-explanatory, covers funds to carry out cleanup activities at brownfield sites by the applicants. And the EPA solicits these grants on an annual basis. So who's eligible for EPA brownfield grants? You're eligible if you're a state government, regional county government, local or municipal government, tribal nation, or nonprofit organization. And as mentioned before, the EPA solicits these grants on an annual basis. So typically, the solicitation cycle will start with the request for applications, or RFA, being released in early fall. The application submission date is approximately 6 weeks after the request for applications, about wintertime. The EPA announces the successful applicants the following spring, and finally, the funding becomes available to grantees in late summer. So roughly, it's usually about a timeline of 1 year from that initial request for applications to the final step of the grant funds being available to the successful applicant. The main thing that I kind of want to note here with this slide is that there really is an unprecedented amount of money that's been committed, and they're able to do this because of the passing of 2021's bipartisan infrastructure law. It's our current understanding that these amounts have been committed for up to the next cycle, so fiscal year 26. Which will be available, or the request for application should go out this fall. And I'm not sure if we'll see this level of funding again. So if you're on this webinar and you're interested in applying for EPA's brownfield grants, we recommend that you do get started on ASAP. And that's something that NJIT TAB can also help you with. So this is just an example of one area of funding, and that's federal. That's the EPA's Brownfield MARC grants. To discuss more about local resources and Florida's Brownfield program, I want to introduce Allison Amram with the Environmental Protection Commission of Hillsborough County and Philip Wilkerson with the Florida Department of Environmental Protection.
Good morning. I'm Allison Amram, and I am a professional geologist and the Brownfield coordinator for the Environmental Protection Commission of Hillsborough County. And Philip Wilkerson and I are happy to be here today to talk to you for a few minutes about Florida's Brownfield program and some of the Tampa Bay Brownfield sites. The Florida Brownfield program is for redevelopment of contaminated properties. Philip, did you want to introduce yourself?
My name is Phil Wilkerson. I'm the environmental manager and the Brownfield coordinator for the Southwest District office here at the department. Our district office is located in Tibble Terrace, which is right down the street from USF. Here in a little bit, I'll be talking about how to get into to the Brownfield program through the state and a couple incentives that the state offers and a success story that we have. So I think, Allison, I think it's up to you now.
Okay, so to get into the Brownfields program, there are two basic requirements. The property needs to be contaminated or have the perception of contamination. And that makes it difficult for a redeveloper to come in and work with the property because they have the added challenge of this unknown contamination. How long is it going to be? How much money is it going to take to get rid of this problem? And then the second requirement is that the current property owner didn't cause or contribute to the contamination. And the Brownfield program is an incentive program. So if you cause the contamination, you don't get incentives. Okay, so two goals for the Florida redevelopment and contamination cleanup. That's the Brownfield program. In 2004, EPC was delegated by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection to manage the Brownfield program in Hillsborough County. It's a very active county, a lot of urban space, a lot of early industrial space, like Elise was talking about. And the city has changed through time, the county has, and there's more emphasis on living and enjoying the rivers and parks and stuff like that. So Hillsborough County has over 80 brownfield sites right now. Those are sites that are active or closed for cleanup activities. And in the bottom pictures you see, I have a little snapshot through time of the Tampa Armature Works, which is located north of Tampa, downtown Tampa on the other side of the interstate. And the building was originally constructed to be a trolley car barn for the city of Tampa's streetcars in the early 1900s. So the trolley cars would come in for the night and they would also work on them. So there were petroleum and solvent impacts there. And then when the city of Tampa no longer needed the streetcars, the Tampa Armature Works bought the property and they rehabilitated generators, they rewound motors. So now, again, we have petroleum solvents and we also have PCB impacts. Well, once they left to go to another location in Hillsborough County, the building sat idle for a long time. It's right on the Hillsborough River. It's right where people want to be. And it was recently redeveloped into a food hall and entertainment complex. So I'm sure pretty much a lot of you have been to the Tampa Armature Works. It's a brownfield site. Now Philip's going to talk a little bit about the process of how do you get into the brownfield site for the redevelopment aspect and also for the cleanup process.
Yeah, thank you, Allison. So Allison, she's part one of the three counties that was delegated for brownfields. The other two is Miami-Dade County and Broward County. So those are our three counties that the department partners with. And our district, we're pretty lucky to have such a great partner with EPC with these brownfields. To get in the brownfield program through the state, like Allison mentioned, the property owners cannot cause or contribute to the contamination at the property. And then the other big part of that is the property needs to be in the brownfield area designation that is designated by the local governments of the county or city. And it's important to note, too, that the department is not involved in that process. So Allison has some good connections through the county to get that for those area designations. So I highly recommend if it's within Hillsborough County, partner with Allison to get those contacts to get those area designations. So once those two criteria are met, then the person responsible for the site, brownfield site rehabilitation, or the perf buster, we like to call them. They will need to partner with, get in touch with the state or the district or the county, and get into a brownfield cleanup agreement, or we call it a BESRA. That is a legal document that's signed by the property owner or the person that are going to conduct the cleanup and with the state. And then once that is executed by the district or by the delegated county, that is when the time clock officially starts for the cleanup. So if, for example, a site assessment needs to be completed 270 days after the execution of the execution on the BES road or the cleanup agreement. And then once that is in place, it goes through the cleanup process. That is goes through the cleanup process that's governed by the state rules, so 627080, and goes all the way through site closure. Allison, go to the next slide. So this is kind of the cleanup process in a nutshell. I can probably talk hours about the process itself. But in the previous slides that were talked about, kind of went in detail about about the site assessment or remediation process. So it's important to note too the site assessment that's laid out in our rules and the state's rules could be different from a phase 2 environmental site assessment. So obviously, partner with the environmental professional to make sure it meets our state rules for site assessment. And the purpose of the site assessment is to try to figure out, what are the contaminations? What is the contamination at the property? Where it's at? Is it in the soils? Is it in the groundwater? And where, how large is that plume? So we know where the contamination is. Is it going offsite? And then once that is established, and then the perf buster, the people who are doing the cleanup, they would need to come up with a remediation plan, and that is reviewed and approved by the department. And then after it's approved by the department, they go into the actual cleanup process. The cleanup process, it varies the site to site. It also depends on what the end use is going to be for the site. But for the most part, there's many paths to closure for a site. Allison, we're to the next slide for me. So here is so one of the big incentives for to get in the Brownfield program through the state is the voluntary cleanup tax credits. So to be eligible for the tax credits, the perf buster, the people responsible for the cleanup, needs to have an executed cleanup agreement executed for that calendar year. So any work that is done in that calendar year at BESR needs to be executed by in that calendar year. So, for example, if they're in site assessment or clean up the site, at BESR needs to be executed by the end of the calendar year. And I can see here on this graph here, for example, the site regulation that can be applied every year. So $500,000 for tax credits every year can be applied. Another big incentive to get into the Brownfield program too is the liability protection. That's really huge for sites that are going to be commercial or residential use. And another incentive that we do offer, the state offers, is the target brownfield assessment or the site-specific activity program. So what's great about that, you don't need to be in you don't need an executed BESRA with the state to be eligible for that. And we do offer up to $200,000 per site for cleanups and $200,000 per site for assessment. We have a lot more information on that program through our website. I think we just posted some links on there in the chat. So definitely go when you have a minute, go to our website, check that out. Yeah. So Allison, next slide. Thank you. So one of our success stories we like to talk about here at the district is the Gasworks project in Tampa, Florida. This is located, if you're familiar with Tampa, this is located in between Channelside and Ybor City. So this site was a gas manufacturing plant, that dated back into the late 1800s until it closed down in the 1960s, I believe. And so the cleanup of the site actually started way back in the mid 1980s from the previous property owners. There was some regulatory compliance history with the previous property owner and with the state. So assessments started begin in the 80s, and it was until more recently the property has changed hands with a new property owner with the intention of redeveloping the site into multi-use purpose. So on the right, there's a concept of the redevelopment. If you're in that area, it's not developed yet, but this is their plan so far. So they're going to build residential space, commercial space. I think their plans are. You can see in the photo here, an apartment complex, but at the floor level, I think their plans are building like commercial spaces, so retail, restaurants, other businesses in that area. And we can see here on the proposed plan, there's like a little greenway, which is just outside of the Brownfield site, but that's part of the overall redevelopment of this area. So, and then also Allison and Hillsborough County, they're also involved in this project too. Across the street from our project, there's a separate Brownfield site, separate from our cleanup, but there is another cleanup that just got started in Allison, like Hillsborough County. They're taking the lead on that. So there's a lot of coordination between the department and the county to help get this the site cleaned up. So yeah, we're really looking forward to this site again redeveloped. This site, they have finished assessment of the site, and right now they're in the middle of remediation. And so Allison, in the next slide, I think she has a good example of a site that had that was able to clean up and was able to do redevelopment in the process. So Allison, it's back to you.
So I'd like to take you through how this Waterworks Park came to be. It was originally part of the industrial area north of downtown Tampa. If you see the little notch at the upper right of your screen, that was actually a marine railroad. And that was one way that they offloaded ships. They had a rail line that went into the river. So there was some lead contamination there. And then the city of Tampa also used it as a fleet maintenance area. So to get them started in the Brownfield program, they first had their Brownfield area designation, which is the local government's review of what is your redevelopment plan? Is that in line with what the local government wants? You get your Brownfield area designation, and then they signed a BISRA, and that was their voluntary cleanup agreement with the Brownfields program. As soon as you sign that BISRA, you get access to financial incentives and also that liability protection for any claims against the contamination because you're cleaning it up and you didn't cause the contamination. So here they are moving dirt. Okay, they're moving dirt for two reasons. They've got contamination that they're managing, but they're also redeveloping it. They're grading it to make their park. So the redevelopment of this Brownfield site is also moving ahead at the same time as the cleanup. And that happens on a lot of our projects. A lot of our projects will manage the soils and then construct what they want. And then if there's ongoing groundwater monitoring afterwards, they do that afterwards, but they're still operational. So if they're a business, they're taking in money, and that helps with the project too. When Waterworks was completed, I think it was like 2017, this is the final product. It's a beautiful gem of a park that the city of Tampa built. On the left side of the screen, you'll see a walkway along the river. That's called our River Walk. It starts south of downtown. It comes north underneath the interstate and connects this park. And then it keeps on going to the north in the upper left, and it goes to Tampa Armature Works, that first brownfield site I talked about. And this is one of the great things that happens with the brownfield program. You'd redevelop one area, and it leads to people thinking, what else can I do to make this community better served for today's needs? And it's helped to revitalize that area. As everybody has kind of joined in and mentioned, there's so many community benefits to the Brownfield program. There's job creation. We had a project in Ruskin, which is a very rural, think tomatoes area of Hillsborough County, and they built a manufacturing plant that created over 300 jobs. We've had a lot of commercial and industrial redevelopment through the Brownfield program. And also our municipalities have been very good at creating recreational space, especially where it's really needed. In downtown Tampa, they're building a lot of towers for apartments, and people need a green space to go out and breathe. And then more and more, our redevelopments are becoming are being used for multifamilies. There's a great need for affordable housing, and also housing that's affordable. So those are two different things, but we're seeing more and more of that. And there are also additional brownfield incentives for affordable housing. And that's what we would have for you all today. We mostly want you to take away from our presentation, if you have a contaminated site in the Tampa Bay area, talk to Philip Wilkerson, talk to me, and we will help you get started with Florida's Brownfield program. Philip, you want to wrap it up?
Yeah, very well said, Allison. But yeah, just to encourage everyone, there's a lot of information on our website. So the links is in the chat. In our website, we have the BESRA templates, we have the BESRA checklist, we have the Brownfield Atlas, redevelopment atlas that we partner with the USF and EPA to get that created. So it's all on the interactive map. You can search the entire state for brownfield sites on that. So I highly encourage you to go to our website. Like Allison said, feel free to reach out to me or Allison if you have any questions about brownfields. And that's it.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. That was really cool. It was a really good highlight of local regulations, things to pay attention to, but also those success stories. And if I'm ever in the area, there's a lot of places that were mentioned in this event today that I need to visit. So awesome. Thank you so much. All right. So we kind of went through all the steps, all the things that are involved, and funding resources. And now let's kind of talk about some examples of funding stacks. So here's an example of a local brownfield redevelopment project in Tampa and its funding stack. So the site was settled by newly emancipated African Americans who were forced to live there after the Civil War. It was known as the Scrub for its informal settlement built in the scrubby woods just beyond the town limits, and Jim Crow laws forced African American businesses out of downtown Tampa, giving birth to Central Avenue as a business district and entertainment destination. In 1930s, Central Avenue became a full-fledged business district hosting restaurants, grills, jazz clubs, theaters, and more. Music icons like Duke Ellington, Billie Holiday, and James Brown performed at many clubs on Central Avenue. Ray Charles recorded his very first song, I Found My Baby There, while living on Central Avenue. In 1954, the site was leveled to build the Central Park Village public housing development. In 1964, the Jim Crow laws are abolished, and the vibrant Central Avenue neighborhood began to fade as residents began shopping and frequenting desegregated areas. Sometime in the 1960s, Central Avenue was sliced in half with freeway construction, and disinvestment of the area followed. And in 1967, Tampa had its biggest race riot as a result of a police-involved shooting, resulting in uprising and fires, leaving Central Avenue in ruins. The last business on Central Avenue closed in 1974. In 2007, Central Park Village, the former public housing development, was demolished, and planning began for a new mixed-use district that would restore the rhythm of the once vibrant district. Here's the many funding resources such as grants, tax credits, and loans that the project utilized. I'm not going to go through them all. As you can see, there's a lot. But you can see that the development was awarded $400,000 through the U.S. EPA's Brownfield grant, nearly $30 million from U.S. HUD, voluntary cleanup tax credits, funds from the city, programs that benefited the development of affordable housing, and so much more. Currently, several parcels have been developed to date. 2 affordable apartments for seniors, 2 mixed-income apartments for families, 1 market-rate multifamily housing, and 1 with the Encore or Meacham Urban Garden. The new streets and building names honor historical figures associated with the site, and the landscaping was designed to be pedestrian-friendly and sustainable. Today, it's a model for public housing development in the nation. According to Leroy Moore of the Tampa Housing Authority, quote, Encore is evidence that an environmentally sensitive and conscious redevelopment in a city core is possible. A little less local, but here's another example of a project in the city of Tallahassee, whose 3 sites within the Gaines Street corridor used funds from several different sources, including the state of Florida's targeted Brownfield program and US EPA's Brownfield Mark grants, such as assessment, cleanup, and revolving loan fund grants. Now, while navigating the steps of the Brownfield redevelopment process, individuals and organizations may find themselves having more questions and needing further guidance. We all mentioned a lot of different steps, a lot of different information that's needed or involved, and that's where we come in. Do you need help with any of these essential steps in your process, such as navigating or understanding the regulatory process, identifying funding stacks, engaging the community, understanding technical issues and what's written in your phase 1 and phase 2, or maybe reviewing your grant applications? New Jersey Institute of Technology's Technical Assistance to Brownfield Communities program, or NJIT TAB, is a free technical assistance to state, regional, county, tribal, and local government entities and nonprofit organizations that are interested in learning about, assessing, identifying, cleaning up, and redeveloping brownfield sites in EPA regions 2 and 4. We provide assistance for free in 3 main ways. The first of which is our Brownfields Academy, which is available at njit.edu/tab. That's our website. There, you can find recordings of past webinars, how-to videos, news, upcoming events, as well as resources like funding sources and federal and state contacts. We also do community engagement and educational forums like this webinar that you're currently listening to, or other events and workshops like summits, Brownfield 101 or Brownfield Basics, grant writing workshops, and so much more. And finally, we have our one-on-one assistance, which I really think is our main bread and butter. That includes answering your questions. I like to say that whether you call us up once and ask a question and we don't hear from you again, well, we hope the best for your projects. If you want to meet monthly to discuss where you are in your projects, or maybe work on something like this, a webinar, that works too. We can do things like answering questions, reviewing grant applications, helping with brownfield inventories and prioritization, maybe explaining cleanup technologies or creating roadmaps and reviewing those environmental site assessments, and so on. So after all this information, what's next in your brownfield endeavors? As stated earlier, if you're just getting started, you'll want to put together your brownfields task force so that you can begin driving down your route. From there, you need to create a brownfield inventory with information about the site, such as owner, environmental status, acreage, access to the site, and more. And then after that, you can begin identifying which brownfield sites you would like to prioritize based on your site reuse vision, your community's needs, and the area's context. Some of you may have already had experience with brownfield projects. Maybe you're stuck on effectively engaging the community or securing the right funding resources, or maybe writing your grant and putting your grant team together, or something else. So the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council and NJIT TAB plan to offer more tailored webinars in the future and will work closely with the local governments to explore funding opportunities and potential collaborations. So that we have a better understanding of where people are in their brownfield projects and what you would be interested in hearing about more, please take a second to answer these poll questions. We're going to pull up the poll right now. Just a few questions, but if you could give us an answer just so we can see where people are, how they're feeling. I know it was a lot of information to take in today. And with that, I'd like to say thank you so much to everyone who presented today. Thank you so much to everyone who took the time to attend today. Kaylin's contact information, as well as my contact information, is up on the screen. Other presenters' contact informations were on the screens, are posted in chat, will also be sent with the slides to all the attendees at the end. I'm going to move on to the next slide, which I believe is Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council's contact information up there. And I know we had a lot of questions in chat, which is awesome. We really want to get this conversation started and keep it going. Like I said before, knowledge is power, and working together is a huge step of brownfield projects. So with that, I'd like to open up the floor for questions and answers. I know that Charity Franks with Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council is going to lead that. But we do have some questions in chat. We do have some questions in the Q&A box. I know that some were already answered. Thank you so much for those answers. And I'll let you take it away, Charity. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you, Elise. And as we wrap up, I do just want to thank everyone for being here today. We understand if you have to go, but if you want to hang in here, we can answer some of your questions. So if you haven't already asked questions, put them in the Q&A box. If you want our contact information, or you want follow-up information about brownfields events that we're going to be hosting, reach out to us. Okay, so I'm going to look at some of the ones that weren't answered. Someone asked, Brooke Driscoll asked, on DEP map, what is the difference between qualified opportunity zones and opportunity corridors?
That's not something I know the answer to. I don't know if Philip.
Yeah, if you're looking at if you're using the map direct layers, if you go in and click on the actual layer itself, sometimes it will pull up where that layer is coming from. Sometimes it's coming from the department, sometimes it's from a third party. So that, for example, the qualified opportunity zone, that we pulled that layer from the U.S. Department of Treasury, that depicts all qualified opportunity zones in the United States. In that layer, there is like a link to it, like where we got that information on Map Direct. So that's probably what you're looking at. You guys just go on that, click on those links if you can. It should show you what the difference are, the differences. But yeah, that's coming from a third party. So, for example, this one's coming from the IRS. So if you have any more questions, feel free to reach out to me, give me a call.
Thank you, Philip. We have another question from Liz Terry Fiol. She asked, what are your predictions or concerns on how the recent presidential executive orders will affect the Brownfields program?
How did I know that was going to come up today? It's very much in the news this week, and I know that's on the top of everyone's mind, really, as the situation does seem to change day to day, even hour to hour. And I mean, the answer is, I don't know. It's kind of a wait and see situation. We're hoping that the funding that was available through the bipartisan infrastructure law that has been committed is going to remain committed for the current grantees, and also the for this next round coming up. And I also hope to say too that, like, even with this influx from the bipartisan infrastructure law, I will say, the program is still very competitive. So it really does show that there's a huge need for this funding. So, just on a personal level, I hope they look at the data, recognize that, and, keep the funding levels where they are. Otherwise, going back to the regular appropriated funds. I anticipate, that will still be available.
Thank you, Caitlin. Amy Elliott asked, are these county property tax credits?
This may have been asked during a specific project that was brought up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Florida.
Oh, sorry.
I think this question refers to like the Florida tax credits in general. And Philip, I don't know, sorry to put you on the spot again, but did you want to talk a little about like the brokering system and how that works?
Yeah, I'm not too familiar with the brokerage system, but there is a system in place for counties, still take advantage of our local governments to take advantage of the tax credits. Our point of contact with for that for DEP would be Megan Johnson or Courtney Jones Stone. Those are kind of my go-to for the tax credits. If you email me, I can send you their information. Their information are also on our website. On that link that was in the chat. So there's a lot of information about the voluntary tax credits, about the brokerage system on that. Can't find it, just reach out to me or reach out to Megan or Courtney up in our Tallahassee offices.
I can chime in on that one too. The voluntary cleanup tax credits are tax credits that are issued on the Florida corporate income tax. So if you are not a business in Florida, you don't pay that, you can resell it on like a secondary financial market. I think it runs between like 89 and 92 cents on the dollar to resell it.
All right, thank you. We have a question from Amy Talese. She says, do local governments offer approved environmental professionals who are fully authorized to determine a site is contaminated, and what those contaminants are, together with how extensive the contamination is?
I can tell you that the EPC in most counties do not, they don't do the site work for you. That's a private property transaction. Whoever owns the property would hire an environmental consultant to look at the property. What we can do is help you find any existing public records for that site. There's a lot of information on Map Direct, which is the Florida DEP's inventory map, and you can click on your location and find sites, and you can even access the documents through there. So you could call DEP, you could call EPC, and we could help you find existing documents.
Yeah, and on that note, DEP, at least our district office, we do host trainings that's open to the public to go through our Map Direct and also our public database Oculus. I believe we do those quarterly. So again, reach out to me. We do have an open house. This is my Southwest District plug here. So we do have an open house in April, April 5th, I believe. It's the first Wednesday of April. But we have like an open house where we'll be doing trainings to the public on how to, utilize Oculus or Map Direct and all that. So, feel free to get in contact with me about the open house.
All right, thank you. I think this one was answered. Katie McMillan asked, can unliked, unwanted, abandoned property count as a brownfield if the soils, water, and building are not actually polluted?
Yeah, so Victor, thank you for chiming in with the definition of brownfields and highlighting, yes, it is the perceived that also gives this definition some flexibility. So based on what we know about the site history, maybe we have reason to suspect that there's asbestos, lead paint, that sort of thing. I would like to point out too, though, Ananya said something important in the chat. And that's a contaminated site might not be the actual prior gas station or the dry cleaners. This contamination moves. So when we have groundwater plumes, it can move from one site to another. And it brings those impacts along with it. So what does that mean for the surrounding properties? Would they also be considered brownfield? And, I would say yes, because you would still need some level of assessment and cleanup potentially for that site in order to put it back in a productive reuse and maybe reuse it for something sensitive like a daycare. So those are really important considerations as well. And that's something that's also looked at during the phase 1 environmental site assessment. It's not just the site, it's the surrounding sites as well. So
I'd like to add on to that one too. I'm glad you brought that up because there are different incentives available if you are adjacent to a site with a BizRev for that very reason. And you can do your brownfield area designation for redevelopment, but not sign a cleanup agreement because that didn't originate on your property. And you can get sales tax credits on your building materials if you build affordable housing or healthcare, and that's commonly used in Florida's brownfield program.
Thank you. And then we did have some questions in the chat. Alana, did you want to take these?
Sure. Thanks, Sharon.
Great. Thank you.
So we had a question about the sludge soil asbestos and where that goes when it's removed from the locations.
Mm-hmm.
Kaylin, is that?
yeah, it can depend. Sometimes that soil can be treated off-site and then recycled and reused somewhere else. They can actually remove the contamination from it off-site. Sometimes it goes to a landfill. Something like asbestos, it'd have to go to a specialty landfill. So yeah, it depends.
Great, thank you. So if a brownfield property was a landfill, is there an amount of time for the waste to compost before the land can be reused? How do they determine if the land is still contaminated?
If it was something like a registered landfill is properly closed, they do have monitoring plans in place to monitor the potential impacts over time. So for many years, probably decades. One of the things that they monitor is the level of methane gas that the landfill is off-gassing. They have sampling points, and over the lifetime of a landfill, it kind of looks like a bell curve. So that methane will reach a peak and then it will go back down. Once it goes down to safe levels, I think that's, generally when you can start thinking about the reuse. And then there's also a geotechnical component. So like the actual settling of the stuff in the landfill. There's a rule of thumb I've heard like 25 or 30 years for that settlement to happen. But this is like, it gets really technical and you'll need engineering, some robust engineering to be able to tell you that.
Also, there's a difference between a permitted landfill that was permitted by the state government. In that case, they have rules that talk about how you can reuse it and you work with the state agency. In Hillsborough County, we have a lot of pre-permit era landfills. We have over 170 that were historic dumps. No liner, no monitoring, that kind of thing. And Hillsborough County EPC has a program called the Director's Authorization, and it's specifically targeting how you can reuse and redevelop old landfills. What are the processes? It takes into account your stormwater, your building load, your gas generation, and those kinds of things. So if you are in Hillsborough County, please contact the EPC about redeveloping over an old dump. Thanks.
Thanks, Kaylin. Thanks, Allison. So here's another question. We bought a brownfield property, an abandoned golf course, without conducting an environmental assessment or an environmental impact statement. We have since found out that the lack of environmental review has disqualified us from much state and federal funding. What can we do now to qualify for grants?
Yeah, that's a very tricky situation. It's not uncommon either. It would depend. So we bought a brownfield property. So if you're a form of local government that purchased the property, I would recommend looking at building out like your stakeholders and partnerships, and maybe one of them will be qualified to be eligible for the some assessment work. If you need some cleanup, unfortunately, a lot of the grants that are available, you need to actually own the site. So if there's, it depends on what the reuse potential is too. So say you're hoping to attract a developer then to be able to develop the site. Yeah, I'd work on maybe marketing the site to developers and working with your developer community to be able to take that on. There's a lot of, it depends. So yeah, you are going to be disqualified for a lot of money, unfortunately.
So the recommendation is to do those assessments before you purchase the property.
Yeah.
The good lesson learned. Okay. And can a site truly be considered a brownfield site without a designation from a local municipality? And how do you do the sampling if you don't own the building?
Yeah, that's a common question we get asked by communities. Like who holds the official list of all of the like formerly designated brownfields in my community? Or like, is there a certification process? And the answer is no. So aside from the program that Allison and Philip discussed with, actually making a formal resolution with your council, a brownfield, from the eyes of the EPA at least, as long as it just fits in within that definition, which can be kind of broad, then it is a brownfield. So, I hope that answers that. And we're going to discuss that a little in one of the previous questions as well. But how do you do the sampling if you don't own the building? You're going to need site access agreements to do that.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks, Kaylin. And this is in reference to Allison and Philip's presentation. How common is delegation to the county?
There are only 3 delegated programs from the Florida DEP, and it's a memorandum of agreement and delegation between the state and the county. And it basically says that you could manage the whole program, get people in for the brownfield voluntary cleanup, run everything. You have the staff to run people through the 62780 cleanup process, and legal support for the agreements and closure orders. Miami, Broward, and Hillsborough are the only ones that I know of that have actually applied. There are some more dense counties like up in the Jacksonville area, Pinellas County, that may be able to do that too. I would suggest that if any counties were interested in delegation, that they contact the state brownfield director, who's Scott Sweeney, and his contact information is on the DEP website.
Yeah, like Allison said, those are just the 3 counties right now that have the delegation: Hillsborough, Miami-Dade, and Broward County. And there are kind of go back to like DEP and with Hillsborough County. We do have some sites that were in cleanup before a BESRA was executed, and within Hillsborough County, and we have had some sites, after they get into a proper cleanup agreement. Sometimes we'll pass those projects over to the county, and sometimes vice versa. Sometimes the county will send things our way to kind of finish up.
Thank you, Allison and Philip. So we have another question in the Q&A, and I think this is appropriate for Stephanie and Allison. I'd like examples of how various organizations beyond the grant recipient has worked together during the entire process. Are there any longer version stories out there for inspiration?
Longer version stories. Encore is the really long one because that began with the cleanup or the gasworks too. A lot of these contaminated sites were known to be contaminated before the Brownfield program started. So if there was a lot of contamination, it may have become an enforcement issue with the state. And then it can't be a Brownfield site if the responsible party who caused the contamination is still in control of the property. So a lot of the Brownfield opportunities happen at a point of property purchase. As far as partnerships, as the geologist on the cleanup part of the program, I work with the state DEP. I work with the county economic development. I work with the consultants on the property who are doing the cleanup, the attorneys who are promoting the project and making sure that all the legal agreements between the property owners are in effect. I work with the property owners. Usually the grant money is separate. And that if the state has questions about the VIC-TIC eligibility, they'll call the site project managers at the delegated programs or the state. So those are some of the partners that we work with from the Brownfield cleanups aspect.
Thanks, Allison. Do we have any other questions? I'm not seeing any in the chat or in the Q&A. So Chris is looking for written stories about the process and who is involved. Elise, do you on your team have any sort of case studies kind of documenting like multi-year partnerships or Allison, maybe you can chime in?
Yeah, absolutely. And they may not be local to the Tampa Bay area. So NJIT TAB, we cover EPA regions 2 and 4. And that includes New York, New Jersey, U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and then all the southeastern states as well. So we do have examples of that as well. The slides that will be sent out to all the attendees, the ones on Encore Tampa, that kind of funding stack example that I gave, what I talked about, there's so much more to it than just the information that I gave about where it was at the beginning and then how it got to the end. And there's a lot of partnerships that were involved as well. So many more different aspects of funding. I had that list of so many different bullets of all the funding opportunities and different things like that. So those slides actually have the case study, little URL on the bottom right, and those will be sent out to attendees. In addition, you can always contact myself, Kaylin, someone else on the NJIT TAB team, and we do have examples that we could give you.
The EPC and the other delegated programs for Florida also have to submit an annual Brownfield report and to the state every year. And those are posted on the DEP website. It's also on the EPC Brownfield website. And it talks about the different projects that we've had, how they've gone through cleanup, and what the redevelopment is. So that's also a resource. And the state also has an annual report to the governor's office that talks about different projects and highlights what their completion success stories.
Great. Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Elise. It's wonderful to learn about these new resources. I'm so glad we can connect our attendees with those. And that is a great segue to Fatima, who's going to review some of the upcoming events being offered by NJIT, which if you guys are not already in contact with NJIT, like Elise and Kaylin and the others, please get in touch with them because they are a wonderful resource for all of this Brownfields work. Could not have done this workshop without them, and we look forward to collaborating with them in the future. So thank you so much, NJIT, and please take it away with some of your upcoming events that we can refer to.
Again, we thank you for showing up today. We really appreciate it. And thank you so much, guys, over at Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, Florida DEP, as well as Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. Truly appreciate your assistance today and the wealth of information you're able to share with our guests.